The night the harbour began speaking to him, Malcolm Dewhurst had $93 left in his checking account, a stack of unpaid parking tickets, and a PhD in early American history that nobody in Boston seemed willing to hire. He was sitting on the seawall behind the aquarium, watching ferries fade into the Atlantic haze, when the fog rolled in like an unspooled bandage, thick and silvery. It lapped against his ankles, climbed his shins, and whispered names that sounded half-remembered from footnotes: Hutchinson, Revere, Attucks. Then, as the Old North Church bell tolled 10, the fog added something that did not belong in any colonial chronicle. Buy Pennington paper at open, sell by noon. Malcolm froze. He had spent the afternoon scrolling job boards, thinking about temp agencies, anything to keep up with rent. Pennington paper was a stagnant, century-old conglomerate best known for stuffing discount tissues into airport bathrooms. Why would colonial ghosts, if that was what he was hearing, care about a one industrial stock? He opened his phone, checking the previous day's closing price, $4.31 a share. It barely moved 3 cents in a normal week. He tucked the detail away like a useless trivia fact, trudged home to his one-room apartment in Alston, and fell asleep amid piles of research notes on forgotten minute men. At 9:30 a.m., curiosity pried him from bed and pulled him toward his battered laptop. Pennington paper opened at $4.32. Nothing. At 10:13, a rumor leaked that Pennington had landed a defense contract for eco-friendly rations packaging. By noon, the stock hit $9.87 before halting for volatility. Malcolm stared, mouth dry. The fog had doubled the stock in 2 hours. An accident, he tried to tell himself. Yet that night, he returned to the seawall with a yellow legal pad. The fog arrived promptly at 10, whispering like starch-crinkled petticoats. Short chrysalis air, buy back at close, it murmured, the vapour swirling around his shoes. Malcolm wrote the words down, then pretended to ignore them. He took the Green Line home, convinced he was losing his mind. Next morning, he borrowed his roommate's Robinhood account, ostensibly to teach him about 18th century debt instruments, a lie that fooled no one, and placed a small put option on Chrysalis Air. By 4 o'clock, a fuel pump fire at Logan grounded a fleet of the airline's planes, and the shares plummeted. The trade paid his roommate's rent, the parking tickets, and left enough for groceries and a steak dinner Malcolm had not tasted in years. 2 trades, 2 uncanny victories. Somewhere in the fog of the Boston Harbor, colonial ghosts seemed to know the pulse of global capital. And why not? The city had always traded on whispers in taverns and counting houses. Maybe the spirits of those long-dead speculators still followed the cargo manifests, tracking fortunes from beyond the veil. Malcolm's historian's brain wanted to document it all, the timbre of the voices, the recurring names, the way the cadence of their advice echoed the clipped language of 18th century broadsides. The broke 21st century pragmatist in him saw a different path. Bottle the fog, monetize the whispers, and climb out of poverty before the landlord noticed the late checks. He scoured local hardware stores for laboratory glass, rejected beakers for mason jars, then settled on vintage apothecary phials he found at an estate sale in Brookline. The glass was hand-blown, the stoppers corked, just archaic enough to feel appropriate. 2 nights later, he stood on the seawall in a cheap poncho, files lined in a fishing tackle box. When the fog drifted in, he scooped it carefully, imagining he was ladling soup. It seemed absurd. Fog is simply water suspended in air, but the vapour clung inside the files like trapped breath, even after he sealed them. The whispers continued, muffled yet distinct, like a seashell pressed to the air. Back in his apartment, he uncorked the first vial. The fog spiraled out, grey and alive. Accumulate Helios mining over the fortnight, it rasped. He jotted the instruction. The second vial spoke of sugar futures, the third of a pending antitrust suit. Each provided a granular price point, stop-loss guidelines, sometimes even timestamps. Malcolm tested the advice with small trades. Week after week, the win ratio stayed ludicrously high, 19 trades out of 20 profitable. He grew bolder, leveraging options, buying on margin. The meagre checking account swelled to 5 figures, then 6. Soon he wore tailored jackets to the library archives and tipped baristas $20 on a latte. Yet he knew a single mistimed rumor could expose him or crash the market. He needed cover, a way to offload risk, and why not earn a fee in the process? He compiled a dossier of trades and returns, removed all supernatural references, and sent anonymous emails to boutique hedge funds across the Seaport district. Most dismissed him. One, Corsair Capital, invited him to a rooftop bar overlooking the harbour. Corsair's manager, Quinn Barlow, was 33, laconic, and reputed to enjoy floating fortunes on insider tidbits, mere seconds before the SEC could blink. Quinn reviewed Malcolm's spreadsheet under the glow of heat lamps, eyebrows arching like sail masts. You front-run Fed decisions? These call spreads trigger hours before announcements. I have a modelling tool, Malcolm lied. Exploitative sentiment scraping. Bullish, Quinn said. We'll seed you with 5 million. You clear 20% monthly, keep a quarter of net. But we'll need transparency, source code, signal feed, real-time pings. Malcolm swallowed. Proprietary. I can't share the engine, only the outputs. Think of me as an oracle. You ask a question, I answer, Quinn chuckled. All right, Delphic. Performance buys freedom. They signed a contract. By January, Malcolm's coded messages fog, distilled into crisp bullet points, guided Corsair through earnings seasons like a frigate with star charts. The fund returned 126% in 9 months. Forbes profiled Quinn as the harbour hedgehog. Meanwhile, Malcolm moved into a loft near the old State House, filled it with antique flags, and turned the spare room into a makeshift still for fog. Success, however, bursts its seams. The more Malcolm bottled, the more the fog resisted containment. Early files had weighed almost nothing. Now they grew heavy, as if saturated with centuries. When he uncorked them, the vapour sometimes condensed into silhouettes. A man in a tricorn hat slamming a fist on a tavern table, a woman quilling petitions. He heard muffled drums, smelled gunpowder, tasted molasses. The instructions, too, shifted. Instead of mere tickers and positions, the voices started issuing pronouncements. Liberty was never the property of the few, one whispered, thick with gentle menace. You trade in chains you cannot see. Stand aside, scribe, another thundered from inside the glass. We have accounts to settle. Malcolm tried to ignore the change. He cranked production from 12 vials a night to 50. Selling signals to 3 more hedge funds under Shell LLCs. His bank balance ballooned. Yet, each transaction felt like chiseling at a tombstone, releasing something that had once rested peacefully. In April, when the red brick city thawed, the consequences surfaced. Boston woke to anomalies. The Liberty Tree plaque near Boylston wept sap. Lanterns in the Old North Church flickered in patterns resembling Morse code. Harbour boys chimed songs nobody recognised. Tourists filmed orbs coiling above the USS Constitution's deck at midnight. The Globe ran a feature, Revolutionary Hauntings Surge, quoting paranormal investigators who theorised heightened ectoplasmic commerce. Malcolm paced his loft, stomach knotted. One night, as he siphoned fog into jars, a chill swept the room. A blue-green figure wearing a ragged Continental Army coat stood by the windows, transparent yet vivid, looking down at the financial district's neon spires. You traffic our breath for gold, the apparition said. Did we not bleed enough for you? Malcolm stammered. I never meant harm. I'm a historian. I recalled. I survived. Survival, the ghost mused. A word the living twist into vexing shapes. The figure extended an ethereal musket. Smoke poured from its barrel, coiling into new files on Malcolm's table, filling them without touch. Each jar glowed like captured lightning. You want fortune? Take deeper drafts. But no, the ledger balances. Then the ghost vanished. Malcolm's phone buzzed. Quinn demanded a fresh batch of signals before dawn. A massive derivatives position hung in the balance. Malcolm stared at the glowing jars, heart hammering. At midnight, he popped one open. Instead of stock advice, the fog howled, rattling window panes. Words crashed over him. Rally at the common as the clock strikes 8. Raise the city, break the yoke. He slammed the cork back. Another vial shrieked a list of addresses, bank headquarters, media studios, state house offices, followed by commands in archaic syntax. Seize their presses, cast off their ledgers, scatter coin to populace. He realized, horrified, that in exploiting the whispers for market arbitrage, he had amplified the ghosts' voices, turned them from quiet commentators into active plotters. The spirits had money now, literally funneling capital through him into the modern economy, and they intended to fund a second revolution. Malcolm considered quitting, smashing the jars, fleeing to Arizona, but Corsair's capital was leveraged immorally high. Abandoning them would sink the fund, perhaps the broader market, triggering investigations that could point back to him. Worse, the ghosts' new instructions to gather at Boston Commons could not be ignored. If any of Corsair's algorithmic bots interpreted the sudden rally as a signal, billions could vortex into chaos. He needed help. He visited Dr. Evelyn Zhao, tenured folklorist at Harvard who had once graded his dissertation. She met him in Widener Library's map room amid parchment charts of colonial smuggling routes. "I've unleashed spectral insurgents," he blurted. "The harbour fog is talking." Evelyn removed her glasses. "Slow down." He told everything, from the first whisper to the hedge fund deals. Evelyn listened, fingers steepled. When he finished, she said, "There's a reason maritime law warns never to bottle fog. It's liminal, a boundary field. You've turned it into a commodity, given the dead a treasury. They're reenacting history shaped by your incentives." "What do I do?" "Revoke their fiscal power, return the currency to the air." She tapped an antique chart showing Boston's original shoreline. On July 9, 1777, Patriots sank a British pay sloop here to stop payroll reaching enemy troops. If you replicate that ritual, scuttle the ghosts' bankroll, they may recede. "Sink my funds into the harbour?" Malcolm asked, incredulous. "Precisely. Liquidate, convert to cash or bearer bonds, load aboard a vessel, and let the sea reclaim it under the moon's turning." He left with a plan as shaky as a rowboat in storm swell. Liquidating positions covertly proved near impossible. Corsair algorithms flagged anomalies, demanding explanations. Malcolm feigned illness, coded false signals that recommended de-risking because of liquidity stress. Funds unwound millions. The ghosts, sensing withdrawal, erupted. Every evening fog poured through keyholes of Beacon Hill brownstones. Pedestrians heard drums in subway tunnels. A phantom horse galloped down Tremont Street, scattering automobiles. July 4th approached. Tourism soared. So did tension. Malcolm spent nights on an aging lobster boat he'd rented under an alias, stockpiling waterproof cases stuffed with banded dollars and bearer bonds. Corsair's profits he'd siphoned out. He labelled each case after a colonial grievance. Taxation, quartering, tea, stamp. On July 3, fog rolled so dense, the Hancock Tower vanished. Malcolm navigated the lobster boat to the coordinates Evelyn had marked, just beyond the present breakwater, over what had once been shallow marsh. Midnight, church bells echoed eerily. He hefted a case named T, slid it off the stern. It hit with a hollow splash, descending into dark water. The fog around the boat condensed into figures. Dozens at first, then hundreds. Men and women in homespun and laced coats, black and indigenous and white, a congress of the restless dead. Among them, he recognized silhouettes from textbooks: Samuel Adams' stern jaw, Phyllis Wheatley's contemplative gaze, an indigenous militiaman he thought might be James Printer. They watched the money sink, faces lit by starlight through mist. "Treasure to the tide," Adams intoned. "But will you forfeit all?" Malcolm swallowed, lifted the next case. "Stamp," he whispered, and pushed it overboard. Keekly spoke. "Ink your own name upon freedom by this deed, yet no ink fades, character remains." Case after case disappeared, quartering, taxation. Each splash loosened a thread in the tapestry of murmurs swirling in his skull. The ghost's chorus softened, like a bar crowd settling its tab. Finally, only one case remained, labeled Futures, stuffed with the remains of Malcolm's personal share. His safety net, his escape hatch. Wind rattled the rigging. He hesitated. A transparent child clutching a drum appeared at the rail. His eyes were bottomless epochs. "Sir," the child said, "we marched barefoot so our sons could walk unhindered. Is your purse worth another chain?" Malcolm closed his eyes. Futures slid from his palms, struck water, sank. Silence. The ghosts breathed as one. A sigh sucked back into cottony vapor. Then, like dew evaporating, they faded. The fog thinned to gauze, revealing a clean line of stars above the skyline. He felt empty, yet lighter, as though his veins now carried salt water instead of greed. Morning fireworks from the esplanade cannonaded across the water. Malcolm piloted the lobster boat home, knowing sex subpoenas awaited, maybe criminal charges. But the market opened flat. No sudden crashes, no ghostly rallies. Corsair issued a terse statement blaming black swan liquidity events for the withdrawn capital. Quinn Barlow was last seen boarding a flight to the Caymans. Evelyn met Malcolm on the wharf. He handed her the fog jars, every one corked and silent. She dipped a single jar into seawater. It hissed, glass dissolving like sugar until nothing remained but bubbles. They repeated the act, jar by jar, until the tackle box lay empty. "What now?" he asked. "You're still a historian," she said. "Tell the story. Archive your folly so the next desperate scholar thinks twice before selling the breath of the past." He laughed quietly, thinking of monographs and footnotes no hedge fund ever read. Yet he also remembered the weightless joy as the last case slipped into the harbour. Perhaps there was richness in restraint. That night, he returned to the seawall behind the aquarium, alone. Fog drifted in again, soft as a lullaby. It brushed his cheeks, cool and ordinary, carrying nothing but the smell of salt and distant diesel. No whispers, no ticker symbols, just the harbour breathing with centuries of tides, undisturbed. Malcolm watched until dawn painted the crests pink. Then he stood, broke as ever, but unburdened, and walked into the waking city, ready for the first time to make his own history.